Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about three names you'd probably never expect to hear in the same breath: Crockett, Kitchener, and Bismarck. It's this incredible story about how a single book by an author most people have forgotten ended up in the hands of two of the most powerful men of the 19th century.
So, let's set the scene. Imagine this. It's September 1st, 1898. You've got General Horatio Herbert Kitchener in his tent out in the Sudanese desert. He's just hours away from commanding the huge, decisive Battle of Omdurman. He says he's ready to the last button. Now you'd think, right, that he'd be hunched over maps or battle plans, but what did this famously tough, iron-willed general actually turn to in those last quiet moments before everything kicked off?
Well, the answer, and this is pretty amazing, was a book. According to Kitchener himself, when he talked about that night, it wasn't some military textbook or a Bible that gave him his focus. No, it was a novel, a story. And that book, it was The Grey Man, written by a Scottish author, S.R.Crockett. Now, as wild as that is, that this book steadied the man about to conquer the Sudan, the really incredible part of this whole tale is what happened a year later, when the general and the author actually met face to face.
Okay, so let's dive into that first encounter. It really shows you the surprising grip a good story can have, even on the toughest, most hardened people.
All right, so fast forward a year. Kitchener is now Lord Kitchener. He's a full-blown national hero. He's the man of the hour at the super fancy dinner in Edinburgh, hosted by a former prime minister. I mean, the room is just a who's who of the British elite. And sitting there, almost by accident, right next to the guest of honor, is our author, S.R. Crockett. So when the host introduces him, Lord Kitchener, this is Mr. Crockett. Kitchener, this guy known for being cold and imposing, just completely lights up. It's a total 180. He apparently grabs Crockett's hand and just launches into the story about how his book was the thing that got him through the night before his biggest victory. So, to really get why this moment was so wild, we've got to understand who these two guys actually were. So on one hand, you've got Lord Kitchener. He is the poster boy for British imperial power, a super efficient, pretty ruthless commander. And on the other hand, S.R. Crockett, one of the most popular writers of his day, a total bestseller, famous for his adventure stories and historical fiction.
You know, the timing of all this is absolutely key. When this meeting happens in November 1899, Kitchener is at the absolute top of his game. He's the conquering hero of the empire, the guy who just avenged the famous General Gordon and retook the Sudan for Britain.
And you have to remember, this praise wasn't coming from some book critic or a well-known literature fan. This was Kitchener, a man everyone said was brusque, difficult, and definitely not the kind of guy who'd waste his time on novels. So his genuine, heartfelt reaction? It's just an incredible piece of evidence for how widely Crockett's stories were read and felt.
Okay, but here's where it gets even more interesting. This run-in with an imperial giant, it wasn't Crockett's first. Turns out, he had this weird knack for crossing paths with the most powerful men of his era.
So let's rewind a bit. Years before he was a famous writer, back in the 1880s, Crockett was just a young guy working as a traveling tutor. While he was out climbing mountains in the Tyrol, he just so happened to be staying in the exact same tiny village as the legendary Iron Chancellor himself, Otto von Bismarck.
So Bismarck, he hears about these mad Englishmen who are out climbing mountains in the middle of winter, and he summons the young Crockett to come meet him. Crockett's description of the guy is just unforgettable. He talked about his eyes, saying they felt like they were going to drive gimlets through you, like tiny drills boring right into your soul. Intense stuff.
But for all that intimidating presence, Bismarck was apparently super civil. He even gave the young tutor a letter of introduction to help him on his travels through the German Empire. For Crockett at the time, this was just a cool story, a personal, completely random brush with greatness, long before he was famous himself.
All right, so let's put these two meetings side by side, the one with Bismarck and the one with Kitchener, because comparing them really tells you everything you need to know about Crockett's amazing journey.
And wow, the contrast is pretty stark, right? When he met Bismarck, Crockett was a total unknown. He was a tutor who just accidentally bumped into a powerful person. It was a great story for him to tell his friends, but by the time he met Kitchener, Crockett was a literary star
invited to this exclusive event because of his own fame and influence.
Let's boil it down. The Bismarck meeting was all about what Crockett saw. The Kitchener meeting, though, was about the impact of what Crockett did. One was a story about observing power from the outside. The other was proof that he now held a kind of power himself.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? This weird crossing of paths between a writer, a general, and a chancellor. What does it really tell us?
Well, for one, these encounters prove that S.R. Crockett wasn't just some popular novelist. He was a huge cultural force. I mean, his stories had a real psychological effect, powerful enough to calm a general before a massive battle. And that earned him a seat at the table with the most powerful people in the country.
These two little stories, they really open up a unique window into the late 19th century. They show us a world where the power of a single, well-told story could travel from a general's tent in the middle of the desert all the way to the fanciest dinner parties in Britain. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We've seen how a novel studied a general more than 100 years ago. So it really makes you wonder, what books, what movies, what stories are quietly shaping the minds and actions of our leaders right now? The power of a good story, it's just as real today as it was back then.